because what it means is that you see the things that are relevant to the task at hand. And so here's something to think about. Let's say that you see a whole bunch of things in the world that you don't want to see, you know, that make you constantly miserable and unhappy. One thing you might ask yourself is, are you sure that your goals are proper? Because your goals determine what you see. Now, not 100%, obviously. You can be thinking about the homework you're going to do and step off a curb and be hit by a van. It's like you're going to get hit by the van regardless of how you've oriented your perceptions, likely, in all likelihood. So I'm not trying to argue for pure solipsism, but it is very interesting to consider that since you see in relationship to what you want, that a very large amount of what you see is dependent on what you're aiming at. And so one issue is, if your life is wretched and miserable, one thing to think about is whether or not what you're aiming at is the right thing to be aiming at. And nothing is exactly the wrong answer to that. I'm aiming at nothing, so okay. You're going to experience a tremendous amount of misery and not very much joy. So anyways, you've got this little frame. You're somewhere, and it's not good enough, and you're going somewhere else that's going to be better. And what better depends upon is the state of these underlying biological systems, and then more complexly, as those biological systems get integrated into a personality and into the social world, then the frame and the goal is going to be dependent on that more complex hierarchical organization. So you're not in here because you're hungry. You're in here because if you get a degree, maybe you don't ever have to be hungry. So the hunger is properly incorporated into your, you don't want to be cold, you don't want to freeze to death in the winter, you don't want to be on the street. You know, so your higher order goals are long-term, socially negotiated solutions to the problems that are implicit in your being. And the micro elements of this, so you could say I'm hungry, that's a physiological state and a conception. I have a vision of how I'm going to solve that, but then, and that's an abstraction. But what you do to transform point A into point B is not an abstraction. You act. You know, so if you're hungry, you actually move your body, say down from the second floor into the kitchen, and you arrange things so that there's transformations in the world. And that's a good way of thinking about the relationship between the mind and the body. Your hypothetical solution to your problem, that's the mind. But the manner in which you incarnate that solution, that's no longer abstract. So, you know, people are always trying to solve the mind-body problem. And that's, as far as I can tell, that's how you solve it, is you have abstractions, but they're not abstractions that are representations of the world. They're abstractions that are representations of action patterns. And the way those are implemented in the world is that you act them. And so it's strange because you've got this weird level of control, you know. I can move my arm, I seem to be able to do that voluntarily, but I really have no idea how I'm doing it. Like, I don't have conscious access exactly to the musculature, except technically, and I certainly have no idea what I'm doing chemically to make those muscles transform. But my abstractions ground out in this movement, and I can observe the movement and modify it, but I have no conscious access whatsoever to the microprocesses that are making that possible. I have no idea why that is. Probably because I'm not smart enough. That would be my guess, right? Is you're only going to, evolution is only going to allow your mind to control those elements of your being that you're smart enough to control. And so you don't get voluntary control of your heartbeat, for example, because you just forget. And then you'd be wandering around, and then you'd forget to beat your heart and bang, you'd be dead. So you don't get to do that. So, all right, so all these different, I classified these again as self-propagation and self-maintenance motivations. And so if you're too hot, well, you want to go somewhere cooler, and if you're too cool, you want to go somewhere hotter. And same if you're thirsty and hungry. And for self-propagation, well, you get lonesome, and maybe, you know, you have some sexual desire, and each of those different systems competes for access to this central frame, and that's something like the contents of your consciousness at any given time. So up pops a desire, but it's the wrong way of thinking about it. Because a desire sounds like something that's pushing you forward, but the desire is goal, framework, emotion, perception, action, pattern, all at the same time. It's a little personality, or it's a little story. Actually, when you describe the operation of one of these things, that's when you're telling a story. So I was somewhere, I needed something, I went and got it. It's a boring little story, but that's the basic unit of a story. Because I don't care to hear what you're doing unless you had a reason for doing it. So I just say, what's the point of the story? And the point of the story is the point. It's directional, right? It says, I went from here to there, that's the point. Here's how I did it, that's the point. And you're interested in that because maybe you want to know how to do it too. And you won't have to struggle through it like I did, you could just listen. And so we're always throwing these little units of information back and forth to each other. And for good reason. I want to know what your point is. Because better I learn it from you than make all the mistakes that you had to make when you were learning it. And human beings, we got that figured out, that's for sure. So, okay, I'm going to just explain this, and then we'll stop. All right, so we're in one of those frames now, and we're going from point A to point B. And so the question is, how does the world lay itself out? Okay, so the first thing to understand, and this is partly the reason I showed you the gorilla video, is that the first thing a frame does for you is make almost everything irrelevant. And that's so great, because that's what you want. You want almost everything to be irrelevant, because otherwise you're going to be so flooded with information that that's what hallucinogens do, at least in their initial stages, is they take away that filter and make everything relevant. You can read about that in Huxley's Doors of Perception. He does a great job of describing the initial stages of a mescaline experience, and what happens is that all of the memory, in some sense, that regulates his perceptions is stripped off, and so he sees everything glowing and alive and magical, like he'd never encountered it before, which is exactly how you would see something if all your memory probably is gone. So he sees things as way more complex and interesting than he normally sees them. Well, that's fine, but if you're like that all the time, then you end up in a ditch starving to death or something. Like it's not commensurate with normal life. That's what it looks like. And so your perceptions are just shrunk and restricted to the bare minimum necessary to keep you moving in the direction that you're moving. All right, so the first thing you want to do is you want to make things irrelevant. Now, if you're with someone in a relationship, partly what you want them to do is to help you continue making most of their possibility irrelevant. It's polite, because one of the things, so you say, well, we have a friendship, let's say we have a friendship. So that means you've agreed to act in a friendly manner towards me and to support me. There's all sorts of other ways you could act, like a myriad of them. And I'm going to do the same for you. So we're simpler to each other than we would normally be. And then you go and do something that betrays me. It's like, bang, that whole simplification is gone. And all those parts of you that were supposed to be irrelevant because you were playing the same game, they're dead relevant, and I don't know who the hell you are. And so that's really rough, and people do not like that. It's this emergent mismatch between their desires and the way the world is manifesting itself. So one of the issues of complexity is that when you hit an obstacle, everything that you have agreed with other people to make irrelevant is relevant. And that's generally a disconcerting experience. Now you can, you might want to toy a little bit with that in a relationship. So maybe you encourage your partner to dress differently, or you go do different things or something, because you don't want to be stuck in exactly the same old rut. And so what you'll agree is how you can both deviate an interesting amount. But that's voluntary and controlled. It's not the same at all as having that little mess of 80 million snakes pop up right in front of you, which is the last thing you want to have happen. And so it's so weird, because one of the things that we're striving to do constantly is to keep most of the world irrelevant. And our cultural systems are designed precisely for that purpose. And part of what you do when you disrupt it is you force people to consider a far more range of relevance than they are even vaguely comfortable or vaguely competent to manage. And it just burns them to a crisp. Because what your body does is, if all of a sudden everything around you is relevant, like I could say, you're stripped naked, I take you in a helicopter, drop you right into the middle of a jungle at midnight. It's like, you're not bored. Standing there, frozen, paralyzed. Everything is interesting. Well, too bad for you. Because too interesting is very little different from terrifying. And so, you know, your heart rate's going to be at 160 for like 2 days, and then something will eat you and your problems will be over. So, all right, so this diagram basically suggests this. This is how you break up the world when you're going from point A to point B. It renders almost everything irrelevant. Hooray. And then what happens is the rest of the world is broken up into obstacles that get in your way and tools that facilitate your movement forward. And that's actually what you see when you come into a place. When you come into this room, these are obstacles insofar as you can't walk through them, and those are tools insofar as you can sit on them and watch the class. This is a tool, and these are tools, and this is a tool, and I'm a tool for, although I'd never admit it, but anyways, I'm a tool because you need to take this class in order to advance towards your degree. And so basically what you see in the world are entities of functional significance, and those are not objects. They are not the same thing. So, and that's very much worth considering, because see, we're trying to build up a case, at least in part, for analyzing the nature of the structures within which you organize your perceptions. And we tend to think that those are predicated on object perception. It's not true. It's not true. They're predicated on relevance conception. Does it help you? Does it get in your way? Or is it irrelevant? That's what you want to know. If it helps you, you're happy about it. If it gets in your way, you're negatively predisposed towards it. If it's irrelevant, it's invisible. And so if your little scheme is functional, your little frame is functional, then most of the things that you encounter are mildly positive. And that's how you know that you know what you're doing. That's how you validate the entire frame. So, okay, good.